Set.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the January 17th, 2023 Zoning Committee meeting. We will be holding a hybrid public meeting which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7th, 2022. Members of the ZOCO are participating both here in person and virtually, although no, right?
I think you're all in person tonight, most commissioners.
Okay. Yeah. And then we have public. Okay. Let's see. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the ZOCO webpage, the county's event calendar, and the email notification sent to ZOCO email subscribers. Additionally, there's a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. For our planning commissioners joining virtually, there are none. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed and keep your microphones muted as you enter the meeting and during our meeting. So everyone's adhering to that. Microsoft Teams chat will only be used to provide instruction for virtual attendees on how to register for public comment and to field general questions about Microsoft Teams. The Teams chat will not otherwise be monitored by staff or the Planning Commission during the meeting, nor will it be used to collect feedback. Unlike Planning Commission's regular meetings, the ZOCO agenda items are not public hearings. Therefore, public comments is at the ZOCO chair's discretion after the committee discussion has concluded. Public comments can be provided by people attending in person and virtually. For in-person attendees who wish to provide public comment this evening, you may indicate on the meeting sign-in sheet that you would like to provide public comment. For virtual attendees who wish to provide public comment this evening, you may indicate in the Teams chat that you would like to provide public comment, and your name will be added to the list of speakers. And there will be public comment tonight, so if anyone wishes to sign up, please do so. As a reminder, you always have the option to provide written comments via the link in the provided in Teams chat on this. The link is provided in the Teams chat and on the ZOCO website. All written comments, whether on paper or online, will be shared with the Planning Commission and posted to the ZOCO page for public viewing. All comments received as of noon today have already been shared with ZOCO. I will call for speakers at the end of the meeting, and I will ask Mr. Rogers to let me know if we have virtual attendees who would like to provide comment. Mr. Rogers will acknowledge speakers in the Teams chat. Please indicate in that chat what you'd like to provide comment, and your name will be added to the list of speakers. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, following by in-person attendees. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. Okay, I think that's it. So now let's do a round of introductions. We'll start now. We'll go to the left. So I am Leo Sarli of the Planning Commission, and
I'm Jim Lantelmi, member of the Planning Commission.
Elizabeth Guerin, Planning Commission.
Nick Rogers, Community Planning, Housing and Development.
Irina Losik, Department of Parks and Recreation.
Eileen Winquist, Department of Environmental Services.
Cliff Hogan, I'm with the Department of Community Housing.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we have a couple staff who have joined us virtually. Liz, do you want to unmute yourself and give a brief introduction?
Yes, my name is Elizabeth Thurber, and I'm with the Department of Environmental Services, the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management, and I'm the Stormwater Infrastructure Program Manager.
And then I see Walter there as well.
Walter, you're muted.
Walter, I can't hear you, unfortunately.
Sorry. Walter Gonzalez with the Department of Parks and Recreation, working with the Park Development Division as a planner on this plan.
That's the only staff I see.
Thank you. All right. Ms. Lensgaster, would you mind shutting off your camera? Thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to staff to do their presentation.
Yep. So we're going to start the agenda off tonight with a short summary and presentation from Mr. Hogan. He has a series of text amendments that he's in the beginning stages of working on, and this is a bit of is somewhat unique, although it's on the work plan. We have a set of amendments that we've known about for years, and I think Cliff is going to hint at that a little bit, that are more not necessarily policy oriented, more technical and administrative in nature. We've sort of finally harnessed the forces to do so, and we wanted to give Zoko an introduction and a preview of what will be to come later in the year, and it gives Cliff some face time with some of our planning commissioners. And so just very quick, no nonsense, and I guess I'll just turn things over to you, Cliff.
As Nick said, I'm Cliff Hogan. I'm with the zoning division. Essentially, like this is, I guess, the way to look at it is kind of like a new line of business for amendments, somewhat akin to like the commercial resiliency amendments that are currently coming through. And the difference, I would say, is that these amendments are, as Nick said, very technical. They are errors in the zoning ordinance. They are incorrect cross references. They are inconsistencies with external codes and regulations, conflicting regulations, like very technical, that come about like primarily from administering the zoning ordinance, or reviewing permits, rendering determinations, through meetings with lawyers and developers, and just kind of these are very small, like very technical, very zoning, kind of almost nerdy, like problems. And so we've been kind of compiling a list of them pretty much since the reformat 2014, and so we're kind of up to like we're approaching 60 entries in that log. And again, these are all small, like minor errors. And so we are going to, the zoning division that is, will be moving these amendments through in the coming year. And we've kind of organized these into 4 broad categories. There are errors, which are just basic mistakes. These are demonstrably provable errors that, spelling, grammatical, cross-references, errors in diagrams and illustrations in the ordinance and so forth. The second category is our updates. Again, these are things like making the zoning ordinance conforming with the Code of Virginia, various plans and policies that the county has in place, or things as simple as like the renaming of Lee Highway to Langston Boulevard. There's references to Lee Highway in the zoning ordinance that is no longer really relevant. The next category we called corrections. These are kind of conflicting regulations. They're inadvertent policy changes that happened from previous amendments that were unforeseen at the time they went through. And then just further clarifications about the specific text in the ordinance that makes it easier to interpret and explain. And then the fourth are what we call deficiencies, and these are amendments that are the regulations are problematic to administer from a practical or an interpretive standpoint. These would potentially have potential policy implications, like the higher degree than, and I probably shouldn't have started with that. The potential potential policy impacts of these 4 categories kind of go off, starting with really no policy impacts for the errors to there could be moderate policy impacts for the deficiencies. So and I think that's I mean, I can give you examples of each category, if I don't fine if it's. if
I'd
it's-
be curious to hear an example of a deficiency. I think I understood the others.
Okay, so like a deficiency, and I probably should also add that the boundary between like the corrections and deficiencies are a little.
Sure, you guys had to start
This is-
somewhere.
Right, this is more just to conceptualize how we're gonna move this bulk of work through like the legislative process. And so like there could be back and forth as far as like when, you know, what, you know, like we may have it as a correction now, but then when we go to approach it, we could potentially like, well, that's more of a deficiency and, you know, and then these two could also potentially be moved on to other larger amendments, like for policy studies and so forth. So like, I mean, some of the corrections that are on the list are going to be actually resolved through the some of the commercial resiliency amendments. So, you know, when there's opportunities to do that, you know, we take that route. But for things that like a lot of these things, a lot of the items on the list are in Article 3, which covers bulk placement, bulk, building height, setbacks, and all of that. And again, they just don't come up very often. And, you know, in the broader context, as far as like for site plan reviews or use permits, or that sort of. So, yeah. So I mean, as far as examples, like so, an example of a deficiency. So okay, so we have a section in Article 3 that talks about accessory, detached accessory buildings for one-family dwellings in our district. You basically can have your detached accessory building in the required rear and side setbacks, but it's contingent upon the size of the building, the height of the building, and the footprint. So if your building is 1.5 stories or 25 feet or less, and it has a footprint of 600 square feet, it varies by the district, but you can have that accessory building up to 1 foot off of the rear and side lot lines. Then we also have a regulation that says if you have a 2-story detached accessory building, you can be 10 feet, 2 or more stories, you can be 10 feet from the side of your lot lines. But we don't have a category between, for like, so what do we do with 1.5 story building that has an 800 square foot, you know? And so right now it's like they need to meet the current regulations for buildings and structures, which is the same as for main buildings. So it's 25 feet from the rear, 8 or 10 from the side. So that's kind of an example of a deficiency. And you know, and this is an artifact of just like the various amendments that have gone on over the past 60 plus years in you know, the ordinance. So like a deficiency would be kind of like resolving these like conflicts. And so, you know, so somebody comes in and they ask us, well, you know, can I put my, you know, detached studio, you know, it's like we need to basically tell them, yeah, no, you need to be 25 feet from your lot line. It's like, well, but or they need to change the proposal to, you know, match, you know, one of these two. So that's an example of a deficiency. And a correction would be. So again, in Article 3, we have it's an allowance that says that if you have an encroaching porch that was in existence before November 20, 1976, it cannot be enclosed. So realistically, that's not really a setback requirement, it's more of a non-conforming, so it really should probably be in the Article 16, which is about non-conformities. And then there's also potentially like, do we even need to keep this regulation on the books? Like, you know, what sort, you know, so that would be kind of the distinction between the two. Like, I guess 2 examples. So.
Commissioner Peterson, did you have a question?
I did, but I didn't want to
I'm
stop
sorry.
that.
No,
No, thank you.
I'm
That's
still
really helpful,
answering
Mr.
Ms.
Hogan.
Commissioner
Thanks.
Guerin's. You mentioned modifications that would make us more aligned with Virginia code. Now, I know for other aspects of Arlington County, Virginia code is less strict than Arlington's code because we want people to do better daycare. For example, we have stricter policies for daycares compared to Virginia. So are we lowering our standards in areas where where people might say, no, actually, we want, or are we raising the standards because Virginia State has like done better with some aspects of zoning than we have, or?
It's more, so, Virginia is a developmental state. Virginia follows Delaware, which means that, all of our authorities, like the authority to create a zoning ordinance and enforce it is,
Granted to us.
granted to us by the state. So, the Code of Virginia has like certain regulations that, say like you need to, if you're gonna have a zoning ordinance, you need to allow this, you allow that. So, like as an example, I guess back in 2016, the down in Richmond, they amended the zoning allowances for telecommunications for small cell, for both small cell and for like, traditional telecom facilities. And basically it said that, localities cannot, like, we can't require a special exception for a telecom facility, which was allowed prior to that. Our current ordinance is, well, except under certain circumstances, like if we're doing a new facility that is over 50 feet height, there's a bunch of regulations, but our current zoning ordinance still lists telecom throughout as an accessory use, and it requires a county board of use permit. So for the past like 5-6 years, this is how we've been following the Code of Virginia, but we really should be updating our zoning ordinance to reflect that. So that's like kind of like what I guess the update category kind of falls into. Again, another one would be the non-conformities. Like there are allowances for your building structure is destroyed by force majeure. There are we are required under the Code of Virginia to allow it to rebuild in the same non-conforming configuration for that. But there are, I think we have like a regulation, like our currently it's like more than 50% of the building's value, which is what the Code of Virginia said back in like 2014, 2015. Now it's just been reduced to just 50% of the building. So it's kind of just, again, putting this into like making our ordinance in alignment with like what we're required to have.
Because a builder or a developer could sue if we were not following the state code.
Right.
Required by Dillon Law to
Exactly.
whatever they're saying.
Yeah. Practically speaking, the zoning administrator will follow what the Code of Virginia. So for the telecom, if somebody were to come and look at our ordinance and it's like, oh, well, it says here that you need to have a use permit. We want to build this telecom facility on top of this building, and we would just deal with it. But it just makes it easier to it makes it clearer for everyone. Provides straight if it's just. Sorry, that's probably what you want to hear.
That's good. That's good. Anyone else? Jim, you good?
Yeah, we go through this exercise almost every year. Maybe we haven't skipped maybe a year or two, but I remember going through this at other meetings in earlier years.
Debbie was better about this when she was in my position. It's been harder to find time to fit this type of maintenance work in, and so
I just remember having these type of
Yeah.
sessions at some point when I was have been on the commission.
and Cliff, you may have been involved in some of that work in some way, shape, or form with Debbie back in the day.
Yeah, I would say it's a matter of like when we get enough to get, it's like there's a lot going on, and, as far as like changes to policy and zoning ordinance, and so, and again like when we can fit these corrections in, with other zoning studies and other amendments, it's great. But like some of these, are just, yeah, it's just like waiting for like to match like the square peg with the square hole.
It almost strikes me that the first category where it's clearly a typo, where it's a misspelling, a grammatical error, that should be done administratively or ministerially, that it shouldn't even have to go through a process like this. Since there's so clearly errors, there should be a process where you can just immediately, once a year, bring them to the county board on the consent agenda and say, done.
Yeah.
And not have to go through this. The other categories, I get that they're a little more, yeah, that you really want to have other eyes. Is this the same as, are you seeing it the same way we're seeing it? So that I understand. But that first group, I don't think really any of us need to see those sort of things. And you should be able to just bring them straight to the county board and say, it's corrections day, here's a whole laundry list of things. And presumably it isn't just the zoning code, there might be other things that everybody can get together and do. But anyway, that's an editorial comment. That,
well, and again, as far as like, I mentioned there's like about almost 60 of these every year. As far as like the category, like almost 20 of them are like these errors.
Yeah.
7 are updates. There's 20 corrections and 11 deficiencies. So, like as far as like our timeline, we're hoping to like it won't be like we're not going to be taking like all 20 corrections through. Thoughtful about having them, like ones go with like ones. So if there's changes to uses, corrections to uses, do those or
right, but I still think the things like corrections, they're so.
Yeah.
They're so
well, and again, like
given how much work, because I know the workload you have is ridiculous, and I'm trying to keep the workload down and the time you're spending on stuff down, and if there's just some way to have those really simple things to just be expressed through, that I think will save a lot of time for everybody and allow you to be more productive in the things that you really need to be doing.
Right, yeah. That's good feedback. Thanks, Jim. We did talk about this afternoon, so I'm glad to bring it up. Emily, you had another question?
You may have answered this before I came in since I was late, but what are the next steps to this process?
So we're hoping like the errors batch and potentially maybe a portion of the updates group 1 and 2. That would be approximately 25 amendments altogether. We're hoping to bring that through as the first batch, and hoping in the next hoping to take it to the board.
So it goes to planning commission at a hearing. We get a presentation. We say, yes, please do fix all the spelling errors and update the highway links and use. Okay, that takes 15 minutes, hopefully, of our hearing, and then it goes to the county board, and then it's approved. Okay.
Now, later ones may be more nuanced, depending on the exact correction or the exact amendment we're doing that. But again, and again, all these are kind of anticipated to not really have significant policy, if any significant policy impacts. I mean, other than, some of these things, like if we were to interpret to a new ordinance as it's written, basically, two things that are not, I mean, the policy impact is that it's in alignment with the actual amendment.
That's good. All right, well, we'll look forward to seeing any more work. I think, is that it? Does that wrap up everything you need to cover?
Yeah, that's.
Thank you, Cliff. You guys feel like you got all your questions answered? Thanks so much, Cliff. Appreciate it. And we'll look forward to your email saying you're ready with the first batch.
Yeah, no, it'll be the next. So. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cliff.
Yep. All right. What's our next item?
Next item is the stormwater management zoning study, and it's also your last item. So, Mr. Chair, I'll be our lead presenter on this tonight, but my hope is that we keep it fairly conversational. So there may be times where I'll invite my other colleagues to perhaps elaborate or provide some additional examples or fill in some of the blanks that I may have left for you all, but this is some work that we kicked off in earnest towards the end of last summer in 2022. Again, this is an item that was on the work plan that Mr. Fusarelli shared with you at your work session about a year ago or so. And a lot of this work is born. There's a component about this related to stormwater management, and there's a component related to our public spaces. That's the word I usually we're talking about public parks, but public spaces is a broader umbrella term. But the story with this really begins with coordination between CPHD and DES on the outcomes and the programming that is to be coming in the near term related to the Flood Resilient Arlington initiative. And so you are all long enough time residents to understand the incredible flooding that's occurred in some of our neighborhoods depicted on the slide here on the right. Climate change, increased frequency of storms, increased intensity of storms, and the response has been the Flood Resilient Arlington initiative, specifically that second bullet there related to the first bullet rather related to the new types and locations for capacity projects. That's what we're really focusing on this evening. So I should do this in kind of a different way. I don't like how it's sharing. So just bear with me. No, I don't think so. We didn't have any. Just anyone's trying. Yeah, it's just community. It's so there's a couple different points of policy perspective to familiarize the commissioners on. The first was obviously Flood Resilient Arlington. We have this body of work mentioned in our 2014 Stormwater Master Plan in particular. I won't go into great detail, but the relevant strategies we've included on the slide here and in the memo that accompanied our presentation this evening, as well as the Public Space Master Plan. I want to highlight on three just sort of key bodies of awareness and consideration that has been informing our work. The first is the historical positioning, nature, and development of our park system. Arena is a much deeper expert on this than me, but a lot of our early parks and our major parks were located in environmentally sensitive areas along stream channels within what we now call floodways, floodplains, and resource protection areas, but we didn't have that vocabulary at the time. So inherently, there is a demand for environmental sensitivity with much of our park system, number one. Number two, the population growth. Think of the work that you hear consistently from Ms. Hardy and Ms. Garrett in our group. The county continues to grow. With that growth, population growth, there continues to be a demand for all sorts of athletic and leisure space, among others. And then also what we've sort of colloquially termed emerging trends in park design. This is just a way of saying that our public spaces we are trying to do more and try to be more multi-purpose with our public spaces. So for the basketball users, the pickleball users, the Tai Chi users, you can see I'm kind of making things up here. The folks who enjoy just natural beauty, the parks are trying to do a lot in smaller spaces. Approximately 47% of our parks are 2 acres or less. And we also have plans to grow the park system by 30 acres over the next, I think in 2019, we said 2030. We're in 2023 already. So there is an element of space and efficiency that you'll hear tonight. I think Banneker Park has been the example we've been using internally that illustrates this the most. This is an image from the framework plan that shows all of the environmental constraints that went into that. And then layering on top of that, you can see how when we impose the zoning standards, such as our 25-foot street setback requirement, you can see how that play equipment, which ideally is trying to be away from 4 Mile Run, it ends up getting pushed back a little bit from the street because of the zoning standard. And so this is a body of work. It's a piece of a body of work that's included in the PSMP action plan. Again, I keep coming back to the CPHD work plan. We recognize that there's a lot here, And there's a piece of this that's here. We are working closely with DPR on phasing additional elements of PSMP implementation into our work plan. Much like the work from Mr. Hogan, you will be seeing more of this coming your way in the next calendar year. So I just wanted to make a note of that. What you'll see later on, one of the pieces of feedback that we got was, well, why just this? Where's the rest of it?
Yeah.
We're continuing to work on that. So I'll pause here for any questions or comments, particularly from commissioners, but also from my colleagues.
I do have questions and comments on this, but you might cover them as you go forward.
So I'll keep going.
Keep going.
All right. So I'm going to go through these. I'm going to play my best Liz Thurber and/or Eileen Winquist impression with the types of facilities that we're talking about here when it comes to stormwater management facilities. The one that comes up the most that we talk about is the underground detention vault. This could be of various sizes. Commissioner Gearing?
I've asked Commissioner Lynn to tell me what this is over the last few years because I
Oh.
asked it and didn't know what it was. It's a detention.
It's an underground detention vault.
Okay, because
That's
it's
right.
still under
That's the
construction.
one at Cardinal
Okay,
School, right?
yeah.
That's right. That's right. So the commission and members of the public should know this. This is and help me out. We're close to being done.
Basically, the vaults are done. They are regrading.
Yeah.
They've covered them with soil. They'll be installing sod soon. We were waiting for weather, this spring to put the sod in. So that the sod will go in, beginning of March. And then, we're just going to be doing some pipe connection work to kind of finish everything off.
And the parking lot on Lexington, that's going to go away. There's just going to be the parking lot on what's the road that cuts down to Westover.
Parking lot, yeah.
Yeah,
on
that's the
18.
only one.
Yeah.
Because there was like a little temporary parking lot there.
Yeah.
That's great. And Eileen, is this, like, how will we share this with the public? Because this neighborhood was so badly impacted by the floods a couple years. So they'd probably be thrilled to know, wow, look, the county is being proactive here.
Yeah, well, we've actually been working with the public very closely through this whole process, obviously to communicate about the project and the construction and all the activities. We did actually have a few of the neighborhood leaders tour the vaults, while it was under construction.
Yeah.
And I believe we are, the neighborhood is planning a kind of celebratory event, later this year. And so, we'll partner with them as much as they would like to. I mean, I don't know if a ribbon cutting would be part of that or maybe separate, but yeah, we definitely, are very excited to have it.
That's pretty cool.
Complete, yes.
For showing that.
We're going to be talking more about community engagement during the course of our evening.
Is this the first one we're building in the county, or is there? I don't think there's any other one in the county, is there, at this point?
There are smaller vaults. A lot of them serve sort of a single site,
The stormwater for like an office.
Yeah, for a smaller, just for that
I'm talking about
particular
something
site.
like.
No, this is definitely the largest, for a public vault. And I think we haven't gotten final confirmation, but it may even be one of the largest in the Mid-Atlantic area. That's what we had heard from Storm Trap.
Well, just one more. What's the longevity on something like this?
I mean, these are really built, and Liz can jump in here as well, but, this type of infrastructure is built, for 50, 70 years. I mean, it's really,
Don't you have to
intended.
clean it out every once in a while?
There is maintenance. Yeah, we will have a contractor do maintenance, and that was planned with the vault. There are manholes, access manholes on the top, and those will, they'll be, as part of the field, but, they'll be able to access that. So we'll have, I don't know exactly the schedule, but they will be doing maintenance.
I was just surprised that the columns are so close together, because if they're farther apart, you could get a little truck or a little front loader down there and clear it out, presumably a bit easier.
Yeah. I think they'll use like a suction vacuum. We do similar work in the storm drain, inlets and things like that. So,
Okay.
yeah, I see Liz.
Hey, Liz.
Hi.
Maintenance questions.
We also have a time-lapse photograph on the website of, it's a video of showing the whole construction process.
That's really cool.
Is it only the park that is above the detention vault, or will there also be the school on top
No,
of it?
school's built.
The school's done, yeah. This basically is underneath the athletic fields.
Fields.
So the fields will be on top. The playground is kind of between this and the school. So the playground was finished and is open. And that was the important point for this project, was we didn't want to delay the school or the playground, because we know that was, obviously a huge
Yeah, well
project as
done.
well.
Yeah, everything's functioning.
I'll
Yeah.
tie into the school thing, just an educational sort of opportunity here for the community, anything that we can
Yeah.
There's a library next door, any
Mhm.
sort of, like, there's some fairly
Signage.
interesting graphics,
Mhm.
like you showed, there's some good documentation of the construction.
Mhm.
Like any sort of signage and opportunity to educate people, so they understand that they're standing on a big
Yeah,
vault.
infrastructure component,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was part of the PFRC for the school itself, and one of the reasons the school is so tall
Mhm.
was to preserve those
Yeah.
views.
Yeah, okay.
So that worked really well, because then it'll enable this to be built.
Mhm.
If
Yeah.
the school had sprawled around it,
Then you would, yeah.
we wouldn't have
Just
been able to
To
have this.
piggyback on Leo's comment about the education, also thinking, because at one point you were a little girl wondering what you were gonna do, like I always want our kids in the schools to be thinking broadly like, oh, this is a field I might be interested in going into,
Mhm.
or green infrastructure, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think that'd be wonderful if we can include that as well.
Yeah, we do, yeah, we often do signage, for a lot
Yeah.
of our projects, but I can talk to, our contacts at the school and see if there's something as well.
Right.
And I think definitely as part of the celebration event, there may be some.
The signage is great, because the Westover
Very
Farmers
exciting.
Market was right there
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
Saturday,
Yeah.
every Sunday morning.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
Sunday.
It's
point.
well attended.
Yeah.
This is a good commentary, good conference. You're picking up on sort of the importance of public space. There's a lot of comments that have been in alignment with some of the things that we have heard from members of the public at this point. So I'm very pleased that we're all on the same page. So, and this is, I'll let Liz and Eileen speak for themselves, but I get the sense that this is a type of facility that is under consideration for other areas.
Yeah,
This
Woodstock
won't be the only one that
Yeah,
we'll end up
Woodstock Park
seeing.
is actively
Yeah.
being-
It's probably the biggest one, though.
Yeah,
The others probably won't be quite this big.
What was the other one?
Woodstock Park.
So you mentioned it's one of the biggest on this list.
in the mid-Atlantic area, right, Liz, we have heard from the companies.
Right. It's one of the largest because it's precast concrete, probably on the mid-Atlantic states, possibly even the East Coast. Arlington, we are looking at other sites and other watersheds, but probably none of them will be quite as large as this one. And, the truth is you can't see it now, even now, it's pretty much buried. You don't see anything except the manholes right now.
Well, I was
So people won't know. They'll have a baseball field on top. They aren't really going to know it's there.
Commissioner Peterson.
Well, I was just going to say, Arlington does a lot of innovative things. We try to stay ahead of things. We are trying to be really ambitious with our community energy plan. And so I'm hoping that, universities that might study this sort of stuff would be looking at Arlington as a case study. Because I don't know how that, makes it into academia. Commissioner Karen might know.
They need to write it up.
Yeah.
It goes into
Yeah.
Penning magazine.
Write it up,
Okay,
civic
yes,
pride,
please
all
write a
that
paper.
stuff,
Sure.
It's a real opportunity.
Yeah.
for us to-
And we may look for, any potential, awards or anything like
Yeah.
that.
as much
Yeah.
as we can consider towards recognize this.
Yeah.
All right, sorry.
No. Like I said, good conversation.
Conversational.
I said conversational, and I'm getting exactly what I asked for. So the underground detention vaults are not the only facility that DES is considering. There are several others, including various types of overland relief measures, providing safe and semi-channelized spaces above ground in critical flood conditions for if the pipe system gets inundated, the water can flow somewhere. Commissioner Lee,
These are
tell
really
me.
good. What I want to know is there a way to have overland relief measures that the land can also be used when it's not flooding for recreational purposes? I mean, more than just having a path along. it or
Sure.
something. Is there a way we could have a very simple playground or have a bocce court or, things like that? Could that be part of the overland relief? And the reason I'm asking is that this is right now, a fairly controversial area of the Land Langston Boulevard by Spout Run.
Yeah.
And we're trying to create a situation where we could have overland relief at that intersection, but it would mean lot consolidation and incentive to do that because it's private property,
Mhm.
county's not going to take it. So how do we incentivize the private sector to allow something like this on its property? There's a lot, but could it be done that it isn't simply overland relief? It also will be providing park space, usable park space.
What about the park by Westover that seems to have been designed to accommodate overflow water? Do you know what the name of that one is? It's behind the school, maybe a block or two.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. I'm trying to think of the name of it.
And it's got a, like, almost looks like a bioretention area built around the play area.
Yeah.
Are you talking about West Tuckahoe?
I think.
It's off of Lexington and it's
Smaller park,
north of Cardinal Elementary School. It's a small park,
Yeah.
very limited parking, but it does back up to an area that looks similar to these, like the drainage channels from the low-lying area.
It's Parkhurst.
I think it's
Parkhurst.
Parkhurst, yeah.
We were describing.
Parkhurst, maybe, yeah.
We actually looked at Parkhurst.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were too many trees that would be impacted, so, you know, we didn't really spend a lot of time on Parkhurst.
Oh, no, Ms. Neville, what I was saying was, I wonder if that's a bit of a model for what Commissioner Lantami's suggesting, because that playground seems to have been designed, it's been years since I've been there, but it's got some low-lying areas where water is meant to overflow, and they're even around the play equipment.
Right, so the plan would be to try to dual use a lot of these open spaces, but you do have to worry about, you know, structures and things. We do worry about fences, things that debris could get hung up on. But the plan is to make some of these overland flow paths more than one use.
Right, that's why something like a bocce court doesn't need a fence around it, you know?
Right, we've been kicking around a lot of different ideas. And eventually, when we acquire some, when we have enough space like that, we'd engage a consultant to help us come up with a good plan.
Great. Commissioner Peterson.
Just a quick follow-up to what my colleagues were mentioning. Do you all study what other countries are doing in this area? And I say this because I lived in Singapore for a few years.
Sure.
They have the monsoons, and they're also a very densely packed area on a very small amount of land. And so I wonder if there's any lessons that we could learn from a country that's similar to our county and then that has been dealing with massive amounts of rain seasonally for, you know,
Ever.
Yeah, since hundreds of years. I mean, they've only been developing as a country for 7 years. But.
Gosh, I wish we had.
So I think after we had the floods in 2019, we did do some studies. The manager asked us to come up with some ideas, and we kind of all brainstormed. And then I know that Demetra McBride has just come back from Barcelona. So I would say yes, we look at what goes on in the rest of the world and also the rest of the country for sure.
This is kind of for like Irina. I get concerned whenever it looks like we're looking at anything that's open space as vacant or undeveloped, when people actually do use it. So I hear what you're saying about using the space, but you know, I went for a walk behind Gulf Branch yesterday, and you know, if you walk all the way up the hill, there's that big, you know, area, and that was meant to be overflow for flooding. So it looks like that's sort of come up in the comments. Do we have a plan to compensate the loss of this space if it's been de facto park or it's identified as park space, but it gets used in a way that people can't use it anymore?
I think the initial response that we had to that very question in our virtual public meeting, however satisfying it may be, was that oftentimes it's hard to really draw conclusions park-wide, system-wide, county-wide. Oftentimes it's what are the individual conditions at the site, what are the opportunities that are there for tree save, to use areas that have already been disturbed. It's hard to, we're keeping all of these things in mind, but it's hard to do all of those things on every individual site. I would turn things over to Irina or Eileen or others to elaborate a little further.
Yeah, I mean, some of these facilities, you know, could be underground, and so there's still the space on top. But, you know, again, like something with a vault, you may not be able to put big structures and things on top, so you could use the space as like with a field. So there may be some uses that would work on top of an underground facility, but it wouldn't be sort of wide open. And then when you have other areas like with this, you know, the open space, I think again, there you know, are some different options, but you know, you do need to think about there's going to be, you know, flooding happening there and how that would affect anything that you might locate there. So
is that something that we could include in the language if the space becomes unusable, that we prioritize finding additional space in that community? Because the worst thing that would happen is we have some communities that have less open space than others, but where we know we're planning to increase density, I'd hate for those to be overly impacted by something like this without having said, we're keeping an eye on that and that's not our intention.
Yeah.
And, you know, this came up even in the PSMP. How do we prioritize for that?
Yeah, and it may not be necessarily unusable. I mean, it may be
Yeah.
a shift in, you know what I mean? There may be a change in how the space is used. So, because I don't think some of these would sort of preclude it's being used in some.
Yeah, I can't imagine that it would ever become totally unusable space. I mean, just the nature of the facilities are such that they could be multi-purpose, but there are going to be some restrictions because, again, you do not want people at risk in these areas, and you don't want, you can't damage the structure if there's an underground structure. You'd have to, you know, you're limited to the foundation depths, et cetera, sometimes. But when we did the studies we've done.
With the safety issue, I'm in agreement on that. I'm just concerned that with our open space in the county, it is death by 1,000 cuts. That is always the first place we go when we have to accommodate any other need.
Yeah.
Greater housing, multifamily housing, stormwater management.
Mhm.
So I think it behooves staff to put some additional thinking on this notion and to develop some additional analysis and perspective for your staff report that would come in March. I have some reservations and concerns about a zoning requirement for some sort of offset. You know, seeing as much of the focus of the study is trying to get the zoning laws out of the way of our public use and our public facilities and our capital improvements project. But here we are hearing this concern.
Well, I don't want to miss the forest for the trees here, almost literally. And given that there were some comments on this already in the comments, you know, I may be the only person who's worried about it.
I'd also like to say that we do a pretty extensive, whenever we do a project, we do pretty extensive public engagement and outreach. And so, you know, some of the ones we've looked at before, like Cardinal School, it was very clear the community wanted us to preserve the sledding hill. And so we did that. Some of that came up when we were discussing Woodstock Park, as sledding hill was a huge thing that people wanted us to maintain. So I think in our public engagement process, we tend to be pretty sensitive to all of that. And I really don't believe that many of these properties will be, I mean, they're not going to be unusable. It's just they're going to be used differently, as Eileen said.
Editorial comment, those pictures are nice and pretty, but is there a way in these type of facilities that instead of grass, we have like native ground covers?
We had a similar comment, I think, at one of our public engagement sessions. Liz, I think you gave a good answer about the trade-offs between the addition of natural vegetation and rocks and other debris and the capacity of the overland relief measure to provide the relief that's intending to do so.
You need to get the water out of there. I get that.
Yeah.
Well, in some of these areas, the water goes there anyway. You know, I mean, so we want to make sure that what's being used there is consistent with the amount of, you know, for overland relief, that it's consistent with the fact that the water is going to go there anyway. But as far as the planting, I mean, you know, we're going to plant what's responsive to the community that comes out in the, usually in the public engagement. And we do, you know, heavily rely on, you know, native plants. Obviously for an athletic field, that didn't work out very well. But if it's a swale and, you know, a drainage swale or an overland flow path, that it might be that native plants would be the way to go.
Okay.
Nobody's precluding the use of native plants.
Great. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Right.
So in your ZOCO memo, we do make mention of a couple other types of stormwater management facilities that could be utilized in some instances. There could be examples where a flood wall is needed. We have examples of some of those in the community already. We could have some utility with a pond, whether it's a wet pond or a dry pond. That is a type of facility that could be utilized.
Yeah, we're using those dry ponds in a lot of, I mean, there's some that are literally the size of this table. They're so tiny, but they're cool because they're pocket. You can put them in all sorts of places. It's like, that's great. The more we can do that, the better. You know, I've seen them in the medians of roads. I've seen them in parks. I've seen them, you know, they pop up in all fascinating places. And every one of them, they're small, but a lot of them end up making a difference. So the more of those, the better.
I know the county used to have a program where they would pay for part of a stormwater
Like
feature.
projects.
Yeah, and I did a tour and they like brought us to an apartment, or like garden apartments, and like, look, the county paid for this one in this private property. So I don't know if that still exists. I often tell people in my neighborhood listserv to look into a county program. when they ask.
Yeah, it was the Stormwater Wise program. Yeah, that was, it was cut actually during with the COVID kind of budget adjustments. But, one thing we are looking at now with the stormwater utility, potential change to stormwater utility, there may be credits available through that program for things that people have done on their property as well. So it's a little different, but similar,
But I would like to clarify that the zoning requirements that we're talking about today are not for lot level type of improvements. We are trying to talk about things that are going to serve more than one lot in a region. And so I just want to, I did want to try to clarify that this is not for the lot level sort of.
Thank you. We're definitely going off topic to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So I get, so yes, I appreciate that.
So a couple of other examples. There may be some instances with changes in topography where a lift station may be needed to transport stormwater up to a pipe at a different level to catch grade. We do have pump stations as part of the wastewater system in about 14 locations in the county, and so if Eileen, if there's more commentary on this, please jump in. But they're all enclosed with a masonry structure similar to what you're seeing. These are actual, yeah, these are actually sites in Arlington. So, yep. So DES would be intending, if a pump station was needed of some sort, DES would be intending to do something similar to what we would describe. And I imagine that the facade elevations would again be shared with and subject to the community engagement process that would be ahead of that sort of thing. Jim, this may be one of the small detention ponds that you were describing on Larimore Street, but then there's also the.
I understand they're really cost effective because if you build enough of them, you can avoid really huge things.
Yeah.
Will we continue with more of the green streets, like what's on John Marshall?
Sure.
Okay, that looks very effective too.
Right.
Yeah, that was, as part of the stormwater master plan, almost 10 years ago, we did a study, and I think they had found, potentially 1,100 locations, and then we've kind of narrowed those down and been building sort of the more cost-effective ones that, get more water quality benefit, and more treatment.
Do we have, does DES keep like an inventory, so when a street does get a major rebuild, that's the time when it becomes cost effective, because you're doing it as part of a larger project?
Yeah, so that retrofit study, those are included in the mapping system. So when other departments are doing projects, they can see, that there were potential locations identified there. And we actually, our staff collaborate a lot with the neighborhood conservation program, and then also like if Water Service Trees is doing, the wastewater pipe or drinking water, sometimes, if they're going to dig things up, we'll collaborate on that as well.
Because it sort of sometimes drives me crazy when we do a project like we do a bump out, and the bump out's this enormous piece of concrete.
Yeah.
Where why didn't you just put a little one of those in?
Yeah.
Where we didn't need that much concrete. Sidewalk was already so wide.
Yeah, they're definitely working with,
spot.
on the complete streets, kind of, and the neighborhood conservation. So yeah, a lot of the projects actually are kind of going in combination with those projects.
So when it comes to what's happening in the zoning ordinance right now, a couple things to just bring you up to speed on so that everyone is understanding how our current ordinances are applicable to this world of underground detention vaults and overland relief measures and what have you. So we do have a section of Article 12 that in our use categories where we talk about public utilities, and you're seeing a screen capture of that on the right-hand side. We generally classify them into two different, we don't have definitions for these, but we definitely classify them in minor and major. Minor, think small area, unmanned, no personnel, a major utility, think that, the water pollution control plant is the classic example. We have personnel there, it's operating on a county-wide, possibly even a 24-hour basis. So we have those use categories, and taking a look at first at the lower half of the screen, this is the use table for our districts, our lowest intensity districts. You can see by and large, the major utilities, you need a use permit, and the minor utilities are by right. And the stormwater management facilities that we've been talking about would be classified by and large as minor utilities. Compare that to the public district use table up above. We have the major utilities row that's there, use permit in S3A, a blank for SD, and a use permit in PS. But for the minor utilities category, we have no row there at all. And when there's no row, that's equivalent to prohibited. It's a do not pass go. Don't even look at your $200. So a clear issue that this text amendment is trying to correct. First off, as far as our setbacks requirements go, again, in the much maligned Article 3 that Mr. Hogan was referencing previously, within our setback areas, we prohibit by and large the placement of structures. What is a structure? Basically anything that's attached to the ground.
Fences, light posts.
Light posts.
Yeah. And I know I'm touching into a sensitive area per the commission's conversations about Arlington Junction Park, but I'm glad we're having this conversation so soon thereafter that's fresh on your mind. So, and there are implications with this from a stormwater perspective, mostly for the above ground, not necessarily for the underground. That if it's a below ground, that can encroach per conversations that we've had with the zoning administrator. But that the trash rack that pops out,
right,
for example,
would a manhole count? Did it have to be in the setback?
Probably not. That would be fine, because think about with the rules related to patios. If it's below 8 inches, it can encroach in. But the stuff that's coming up above, where this really gets to be a pain point, is with a lot of our park features. Your trash, your bike rack, your recycling receptacle, your play equipment, your dugout for the softball team. All of these, they're affixed to the ground. They're considered structures, and they have to meet the setbacks that are prescribed
here. We could very well
here.
have some of the really, really tiny parks that the setback takes over the whole park, and you could never put anything in it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. We mentioned fences previously. This is an excellent diagram. It's not in the zoning ordinance, but it's an illustrative that's used for administration purposes by the zoning division. And so what I want to draw your attention to is the 4-foot maximum fence height along a public right-of-way, as well as the 3-foot offset that you're seeing at the bottom of the screen along a side yard on a corner lot. And so that those are two areas you're thinking from a stormwater. Think of a stormwater management facility, one of those equipment cabinets, the enclosures. There may be an instance where we'd like to enclose that for security purposes, and a 4-foot fence is just not going to provide an effective security barrier. The same goes for on the public space side of the ledger. Think of all of the whether it's play equipment, whether it's a basketball court, whether it's some of the examples you'll see later, some of our diamond fields. Again, we have very active athletic facilities in small spaces in various parts of the county, and having a taller fence helps contain that activity, prevent the ball from getting into the street.
No, all this is.
Jim's like, I'm sold. I get it.
And it won't be in the zoning ordinance. It just would hope DAS, when they do build these types of fences, takes the actual design into account, because a chain link fence looks awful and it says all on safety. There's lots of good examples in the county of good fences in park areas that we should be encouraging and avoiding the chain links.
Yeah.
You put the cups in that and make cool little design.
Yeah.
That
Yeah, you're
the
looking at it all
wastewater
wrong,
treatment.
Jim.
So,
I I feel like I'm beating the dead horse, but I feel like if, that's another, where, again, the public engagement process, that's gonna come out.
It can't be in the zoning ordinance. I
Yeah,
get it.
yeah, that chain link fence zones up,
Hear it from me.
I'm expecting some adverse feedback from members of the community that, to challenge us to do better on that front, so, yeah.
Last month, and I can't remember the exact nuances of it, but we were trying to increase the height size of a fence around the bus parking. Is that related to what we're talking about now?
Probably not, I'll have to go back and see.
And
Yeah, because is that zone just one of the public zone?
and the neighbors came out and they were like, you advertised this during Thanksgiving, we didn't know, but it was a miscommunication because it wasn't gonna
Yeah.
impact them.
Is this also an Arlington Junction Park thing?
No, it was
No.
related to the bus parking, I think
Is
across
it
the
Green
street
Valley?
from.
Is it out of Green Valley?
No, it was
facility
the
down
bus
there.
facility, I
Oh,
thought it was
Quincy?
in North Arlington, yeah,
Quincy?
Quincy.
Quincy, the one across from Washington Liberty High School.
Yeah, and they needed to increase the height of the fence because, for security and there was.
It's folded and
I
way
think
larger
that's-
issues there.
I think that's because that's the site that's been so controversial.
Right.
There's
There's a lawsuit
And there's,
on it.
people are worried that there's going to be a bigger development there that's gonna get put in
The
by
fence is
little
in
bits and
Camel-
pieces.
Camel's
Yeah.
Nose under
What's
the
the name of
tent.
that site?
It's, no, but we all know which one.
Website.
It's not on Liberty. Okay.
Yeah, so, and they were concerned about that.
Industrially zoned property, number
Yeah.
one.
Right,
Um,
next to the express.
And not a public space, to the best of my knowledge, and not a stormwater management facility.
Right, it was actually, it wasn't even zoned, it was actually an old right of way,
Yeah.
Quincy Street's old right of way.
Yeah.
That was being demapped,
But the history is that
nasty.
Civic Association is
Right.
huge and should be really too.
Right.
They've had so much development with an outdated plan. They feel like they're always playing catch up on the development and that they're not getting the full story. With these taller fences, do we have an option to vegetate them with native evergreen vines or do better to add to that? Or I know sometimes we're told, oh, that's a bad idea, but if we're just keeping something in and we don't need the visibility, that's not going to be in the zoning code, but
It's a question I'd ask of DES and DPR, have we done that, or could we do that
we
from a
have some nice
vegetation?
vines that are semi-evergreen here.
We do, I mean, I think it's an option. I think the problem is that when some of the wines, native or invasive, doesn't matter, they take over the space and it's
Yeah.
really hard to maintain because you still have to
Yeah.
cut them down, they're gonna grow everywhere, so. It is something that we explore. I know that we, not maybe necessarily the fence facing the street, but we do have some wines. I remember Dawson Terrace when we did the project, renovate the playground, very recent, a couple of years ago, maybe 3 now, but before COVID, just before COVID. We had some wines around internal fence. I think it's a fence next to the basketball court. If I
Yeah.
remember. There a couple of years, but so we do explore that. That's always our intent to explore that. So we have wines there going around the fence, but it's not exterior fence to the park.
Yeah.
So it's easier to manage.
Liz?
Yeah, I think DES is extremely open to planting, but again, I think that would come out in the public engagement facility. I mean, the process that we do, where we're not trying to make all the neighborhoods ugly or anything. We certainly can consider those kind of things.
Would it be possible to cite? I'm having a little bit of a hard time sort of understanding exactly what we're talking about. I know that we talked about retaining walls and then having the railing on top of that. Like that kind of makes sense to me, and I understand it. I'm unsure of where we would allow, an 8-foot wall along a right of way that would make sense. I imagine you guys wouldn't even propose that. So I'm wondering, what is the problem that we're fixing? Beyond the corner and beyond the setback, but like, where would we need a 7-foot wall along a public facility? Like, I'm thinking of the Virginia Dominion, right here over by Northside Social. Is that what we're talking about? Some sort of like a utility that would have to be enclosed in such a way that would require
I mean, I think for the stormwater, if there was a facility there that had some equipment, that would just needed to be protected, I mean, I think there was some thinking that, if there was
Well,
something needed about
We're
that.
actually looking at some concepts in some watersheds where we would want to provide some overland relief and a place for water to flow, and then we might need to protect nearby homes with a a flood wall. I mean, that's, yeah, I think that's the answer to the question that you're asking, that we do perceive that there might be some places where that would be required.
So it really is channelization
Um,
as a practice.
I wouldn't know that it's channelization. It would be to keep, I mean, I guess you could call it that, but it's really more to just keep, to limit the inundation area so that it can't, because some of these areas are flat and they might be too wide.
Creating
And
a
we want-
space for the water, but then you're also protecting, so if there's some houses next to it. So not necessarily creating a new channel, but just maybe putting a barrier.
Keeping the water from encroaching into the private properties.
So I was gonna get to the 14-foot flood wall, but before we get to that, there are this fence and wall that we're allowing within the setback. So I'm just trying to understand, what is it that we're buying, essentially, right? Like, what are we paying for at the end of the day? So, and so I would love to understand a little bit better, like, is there a park example where we, like, the I always mispronounce the Banneker Park, like, did we run into a situation where we wanted to put a higher fence or a higher wall along 18th? Like, and so that's where I'm a little bit nervous. Like, are we talking about putting walls to the public face? Are we talking? Okay, I'll leave it at that.
So, go ahead.
I'll say I've got some images later on in this next session that I think will help spark some conversation and help illustrate what we go into in narrative in the memo, but Arena is probably going to be much more helpful.
I think maybe we can leave it after we go through the examples, and I can answer, we can come back with benefits.
Yeah. Okay. So we outlined this in the memo. You can kind of see, I hope I haven't buried the lead too much. We have a series of potential options that we're recommending for your consideration in advance of your public hearing. We'd love to get some feedback. We think that by just adding that row for all other minor utilities, making that by right, that takes the prohibition issue out of the way. That allows DES to go through the public process for facilities that, quite frankly, have already been that are already in the CIP and funded per the most recent CIP from the board, to continue with that feasibility work with the goal of establishing stormwater management facilities on public lands. We're talking about parks. It could be a scenario where there's a partnership with APS, much like the Cardinal project, but the first recommendation would be to make these adjustments in the principal use table for the public districts. Commissioner Peterson.
Well, and this is going to go through PFRC anyway, so the Planning Commission would be reviewing these projects anyway?
Not necessarily. PFRC doesn't, a lot of that doesn't come to us.
Not to the best of my knowledge, not necessarily this. So and we'll check back on this to just triple confirm, because this is an area where I could use some fill in. I was under the impression that PFRC would be for like the actual school or the actual community center building. And that's a part where I need correction.
I think historically that is the way it's gone, but
The fire station. But
Yeah.
If a big structure was done, I'm not talking about the minor ones, we're talking about major ones.
Yeah.
Theoretically, that, because.
Like I don't know if the vault, the Cardinal
Right.
Elementary vault went to PFRC.
was it, Jim, do you remember?
No, it was not. It
Yeah.
was not.
Yeah.
I don't think it did.
The storm pipe we knew about, and that's part of the reason where the school was situated where it was, because it couldn't straddle the pipe. And that was a
Right.
constraint that we had.
No, you're right, because even with the schools, when we did Discovery, I think there were changes afterwards that were not part of the PFRC. For example, lighting the fields.
But like those pumping stations that you saw, that presumably would go through a PFRC, because there's a design to those buildings that would,
Would it?
I would think that's the other thing. I was never sure, if it comes from the schools, it goes to the PFRC. If it comes from the fire department, it comes from PFRC. The DES stuff, DES generally doesn't come through PFRC. It's
Yeah,
like,
like a pump station may be a little different. I mean, a lot of our projects are,
Yeah.
we're kind of working, doing more of the underground infrastructure, so it's
Yeah.
maybe a little
But
bit
the bus
different, but
facility
if we're
did
doing,
go
I don't know for sure that it would.
like with a pump station, it's a possibility, because that would be sort of a new, more of above ground facility.
and parks do not go through PFRC. They have their own separate.
So
Yeah.
we'll do a little bit more we'll fill that out in the staff report for you and bring some clarity on that front, so.
But certainly the minor ones shouldn't go through, and they should be by right, essentially. You're done. You propose it, it gets built.
Well, what is minor? Is,
Well,
Yeah.
that's what you gotta define,
Yeah.
because you're
Yeah.
having
Mhm.
two categories here, which means you have to have
Yeah.
definitions.
So there's the adjustments to the public district use table, a host of different options for setbacks. Now, the text itself in attachment 1 does not list each one of these public space features, but we do list them in the memo. And the feedback we received from the zoning administrator was the zoning should not have this entirely long, explicit, exclusive list. There is some generality, there's some descriptiveness with the zoning language that we've drafted for your consideration to give some options, to give some flexibility for new types of facilities to be, and amenities and features to be considered. But this list, which is here and which is in the memo, this is what we mean when we talk about accessory structures encroaching into a required setback for just a park. That keep in mind that we've talked about different types of public facilities, but everything that's in attachment 1 is dialed in and scoped related to either a stormwater management facility or a public space. So a setback encroachment.
If we were to do something like this and we'd be adding any of these, would this go through PRC? Or would it just be approved? For example, if we were to add lights, not to exceed 15 feet in height, or add a structure using sailcloth, would that go through PRC at least? I mean, I don't think you need a whole new park planning process.
Sure.
But would it go through any public review process?
So, I mean, whenever we would be, so there are differences, like if this is approved as part of the park master plan, finding of these amenities, yes, it goes through the whole process. It goes
Yeah.
through it gets approved by the county board. There is a big public process surrounding that. If it's part of like a capital improvement plan, maintenance plan, when we are replacing existing amenity with the existing, maybe it's just up to the current standards, for example, lighting.
Right.
That would go, we usually bring all of those to PRC. I mean,
Yeah.
PRC gets involved in almost everything we
Okay.
do. But that would also have a public process, because we don't even design, even like to like, we don't design any process without a public input. We have at least series of 2 or 3 meetings.
Yeah.
Even when we're replacing a playground with a playground, because they're always different. We always,
Right.
meet the current standards.
Well,
and all
that should give people some comfort too, knowing that these changes are never going to be very dramatic without them
Without
saying
public,
it.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Never, I mean, I don't see any of these being without public.
Yeah.
I can't see any of these.
My hope is that this opens up the conversation.
Yeah.
With the public, that it affords more creativity and also prevents sort of gotchas where something comes through a master planning process, has that community consensus, and then we start talking about permits with the zoning administrator and fingers start being wagged.
Right.
The permit thing, especially in a park, drives me crazy, because like saying you can't put a bench without getting approval, well, you could put the bench on the sidewalk by the bus stop.
Yeah.
But then if you move it 5
Mhm.
feet into the park, you can't do it.
Yeah.
You have to move it 25
Yeah.
feet back.
Yeah. There's a cutout for the bench for the
It's
transit
absolutely-
station.
It's absolutely crazy,
Similar to streetlights, you
Mhm.
can
Yeah.
have streetlights
Right.
even within the right of
You
way.
can't have it
You can have
10 feet
Yeah.
behind.
songs,
Yeah.
I agree.
I have a question.
Of course.
Similar to that. On streetlights, speaking of streetlights, but now and this is a little bit on the form-based code where we were supposed to underground a lot of those utilities.
Okay.
And they're not. They're being dropped on the sidewalk. So that's the other question. Is that like, and I'll quote Commissioner Hughes, an externality that we're allowing, that now those things, utilities and minor utilities that are intended to be undergrounded are now going to be allowed to be above ground, and we're kind of just inadvertently allowing all that to happen within these setbacks?
So my initial reaction is just thinking about the subject matter at hand, the stormwater management facility. And so an underground detention vault is by its nature underground. The above ground features would be the pond, if a pond is selected, the pump station, and it's really not the pumps from speaking with DES, it's usually the generator that's being enclosed there. So as far what I'm hearing, Commissioner Sarli, and please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking more of like, you know, electricity lines and cable boxes and other sort of equipment cabinets and things.
And we have some of those on parks, these little green boxes and things that I think they're electricity. But I'm thinking of like a street corner where there's that big silver 4 foot, 5 foot tall, by 3 foot by 3 foot traffic
equipment
light.
cabinet.
Those are technically on the form-based code supposed to be undergrounded, and we have not been undergrounding. And now, once we open up the setbacks for allowing these structures, right, could that be considered a structure? And it might not be DES. What is the
Some of
department?
them may be DES, but then there are, you know, some of the other utility providers too. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't know all the details. I mean, we could try to find out more.
All right, so
about
let's
sort of
just flag that
yeah.
to see if we're not inadvertently allowing a lot of this infrastructure to all of a sudden come up and start occupying park space or public space or.
I would, well, and another thing that comes to mind, again, going back to attachment 1, looking at and this is really page 1 of attachment 1, looking at the encroachments that would be permitted. We're talking about stormwater facilities,
Right.
as well as the structures associated with parks. And so just kind of putting my zoning administrator hat on, if I'm an equipment cabinet associated with a traffic signal, I can't, and I'm the zoning administrator, I can't draw a straight line between the two.
Okay, all right.
Do we have any parks where we have overhead utility lines going through them? I haven't seen any, but.
I'm assuming that we do, some leftover. I would
So
have
the
to
telephone
check.
Telephone around is
pole-
Going over them, maybe, yeah.
So would you have to get a use permit for the power pole that goes through the park? When it's in the setback area?
It's an interesting question. And they're not usually done by us, they're done by, most of the time by.
Yeah, but
They
power
normally
pole,
go
but
with
still,
the right
it's
of
in the
way,
park.
don't they follow the right of way though? I
They
think,
might,
versus
yeah.
going straight through a park.
But I wonder if it's like one of those leftover when you acquire land and it
Yeah.
kind of remains there. So it's an interesting question.
I have power lines, power poles in the backyards in my neighborhood.
Exactly,
Not on
yeah.
the street.
Yeah, I know there are
Yeah.
some in residential, I'm trying to think.
And when we acquire lots to expand parks, I don't know if we necessarily can get rid of them, we may have to probably, so that's an interesting question.
Yeah, or underground.
We may have a.
Let me take a look at the watch. Do we have any public speakers? No one signed up,
I
I'm
see anyone in
guessing.
the chat.
Okay, and then how much more presentation / items do you guys have? Have we, I don't want to.
I'm on slide 26. I've got a lot more, I've got a few more pictures, and I don't think I've got, I think maybe 6 or 7 slides at the
Okay.
most. Yeah, so we're quite near the end.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to make sure we don't cut you short.
No, that's good, that's good. We've mentioned fencing already. So one of the items we'd like to get some feedback and consideration on is certainly taller fences for stormwater management facilities up to a maximum of 8 feet high. There is a provision, you saw it on the fence diagram, a 3-foot setback from public right-of-way. In coordination with DES, the thing that's going to be above ground, if necessary, would be that equipment cabinet, that enclosure for the building. And so our DES colleagues feel that they can continue to meet that 3-foot offset from the public right-of-way. And so we did not include that encroachment into the stormwater management facilities recommendations. Now, you've heard us talk extensively about public spaces, however. And so the draft that we've included in attachment 1 does propose and consider a maximum of an 8-foot tall fence within any setback. And again, that street setback is the key, right? Because right now the maximum is 4, but it would also be able to encroach. It would be taller, up to 8 feet, but it could also go within that 3 foot that setback. And there's a lot of text that we were able to. There's some extensive narrative in the memo. That 3 foot setback came into the ordinance back in 1977. At the time, if you were on that corner lot, you could only go up to 4 feet. Now you can go to 6 feet, but at the time you could only go to 4. And so the BZA was getting a lot of variances coming through the process. And so to tamp down the number of variances, the board increased that so a person on a corner lot could functionally enclose their rear yard to go up to 6, but the staff recommended and the board approved that fence should be 3 foot off the back of the sidewalk to create more of a clear zone for pedestrians. So now from a pedestrian, we have some slides that get to this. But this is kind of what I was alluding to, Commissioner Sarli. Some example. These are not. I don't think any of these are 8 foot tall walls. But one of the things that we've talked about with DPR is changes in topography. We're not a flat county. We have hills all over the place, and so sometimes there could be a low wall. Some days there could be a taller wall or a taller fence. In the instance of I think that's. Help me out here, Lion Village Park. Yeah, Lion Village Park, where we have the tennis courts right there. So there's a variety of different conditions where we already have fences and walls, some of them quite tall, right near the sidewalk. And if the commission felt strongly about this and staff needed to continue to work on this, on some sort of offset language, for example, that would allow for the fence or the wall for a park to go right up to that sidewalk, but perhaps only in instances where there's enough width for a pedestrian, where there's enough clear zone, we can take that. But this is an area where we've continued to have internal conversations on this, and we're looking for some direction and feedback and guidance from the commission.
Be careful with those, because we really do encourage sidewalks and clear sidewalks that people can actually use.
Yeah.
With no obstructions. And if the fence goes right up to it, I want to be careful, because we have a lot of really, really narrow sidewalks in this county that are really substandard. And I want to be very, very careful about that we don't inadvertently discourage people from using those sidewalks or create a situation, because halfway down there's a power pole sitting right in the middle of that sidewalk. So the space between the fence and the power pole is this wide.
Can I ask, so would the trade-off be then that the wall would be encroaching into the park space?
Right, and that's the trade-off.
That's so it's the trade-off. I feel like this would be a very difficult thing to make a blanket determination on. I mean, it'd be nice to give the flexibility, but because I think some do, but you're right. Some it might be very tough. It might be something, where the sidewalk looks fine until you get to the pinch pointer. Yeah.
I think that the height, sorry.
Mr. Sarli.
That and the height, I think, because like if it's a retaining wall, I understand it's a retaining wall, it's topography, there's a lot into that. But sort of just opening up this 8 foot tall fence or wall, I'm unsure as to when we would use, like, I understand the 2 foot wall, I understand even the 4 foot wall, right? If there's a bocce court behind it or something, but you can still participate in that space. Once you start to get above 4, you're now segregating the public spaces,
Right, especially when it's something you can't see through.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's a wall as opposed to a fence that you can see through, Commissioner Sarli is absolutely right that
Can you say more about why we would be doing that? Because, like the best practices from William White were, like street level, open to the street.
So I would
see that big wall there in the middle upper picture. Is that a retaining wall, or is that an actual wall that is flat on? It's just.
I think it's retaining.
That's like a retaining wall.
Ridge Park.
Like the fence at Jenny Dean was beautiful. That was porous. You could see through it.
So this is my interpretation, and I'm obviously not trying to steer anybody's opinion on this, but these design details, we always pay attention to that. That is the most important. We don't just look at the park and we see the park from the inside. We are very, very careful how we plan the outside, how that park is going to interact with streets, with our users, because users are going to be coming to the park on that way. The reason why this is why some of these fences cannot be 4 feet tall, for example, when we have some amenities and we have them in the county, we are required to have them more and more for our community, such as, for example, dog parks and community gardens. Their standards are that we need higher fences.
Oh, I'm not arguing about the fence. Absolutely, I get where we need to have really high fences. Around a tennis court, you have to have a really high fence. Got it, not a problem. It's when it's a wall that you can't see through, that's the concern I have. That's that's not gonna work. An 8-foot wall where it's just hiding what's behind it is just wrong on every urban design.
I think, I mean, I don't know.
I mean, we would do that in the park design. We would do that only if we don't have any other choice. If it's like a topography issue, we would never have a wall hiding our parks as a part of the design, just to have it there. I don't think we have one instance in the county, at least in newer designs, where we have that. So that would never be our intention to just provide the wall there to separate the park from the street.
I mean, I could see having it even around the power substations for security purposes. You want an actual wall that you can't see through. That, even though they don't do that,
But
if they
that's
did,
fine, we're
I'd
not
say it was fine.
encouraging people to go in and use it.
Right,
So-
I have no problem with that, but a park, totally different.
And I think, I mean, I completely agree with that. And that is something that gets resolved in some ways through the community process with the park design, because I don't think that community level support or the county board at the end has to approve this project would approve just the wall for wall purposes. But in some instances where we need to have retaining walls, I think maybe defining that.
Retaining wall, I don't have a problem.
Yeah,
Can we add that word in there, retaining wall, to specifically not a freestanding wall, right?
Well, there's also the flood walls too. I don't know if this is separate.
Separate from the flood, so
Okay,
yeah,
this is
separate from the
okay,
flood
sorry.
walls. So I'm hearing some consensus. I think what I'm hearing, Commissioner Sarli, is that the ZOCO is certainly top middle here. There's a topography change. A taller wall helps with, fortifying the earth. Perhaps lower right, I'll go to next. A shorter wall, up to 4 feet tall, is an effective barrier that doesn't preclude that access, the William White seeing into the space. I think I'm also hearing that instances, for example, with the dog park or with the community garden, that an 8-foot tall fence would be appropriate so long as that it's porous, see-through. I can see. The commission has some serious concerns about the impacts with an 8-foot tall palisade wall, something that obscures.
Now, for flood control, that's totally.
And we've separated it.
That's a technical requirement.
Smart.
That could be up to 100 feet tall. I don't care. It depends on what the water is going to be kept away from, and that's what determines the height.
Yeah.
And it, by definition, has to be solid because water can't go through it.
That's right.
So it's a non-permeable height to be determined by the need of water.
Yeah.
Period.
That's the modeling. And,
right. That's the answer to that.
Potential flood depth.
So I'm hearing some consensus to now as a counterpoint to go there, Ms. Lassick has mentioned how that the public process, by and large, we feel would prevent an 8-foot palisade from being erected to separate the public from one of our public spaces. If the commission was comfortable with leaving it up to the public process, we could potentially bring forth something similar to what we've described. But if the commission is really looking for us to go back and make additional edits, that would be helpful feedback to hear.
I can go first. I do not feel comfortable leaving an 8-foot wall
as an option.
Yeah, and that clearly is, right? Clearly right now it says you can put an 8-foot wall, period. I think,
that's helpful feedback.
To compare it to the flood wall, there's a utility associated with that. So nobody's going to mistake the flood wall. And that's why I think if we can introduce the retaining wall, per the center illustration, that becomes really clear. So then you're dealing with the problem that you're solving. You're not just placing a wall. So that, I think, is where I am.
I'll go with Commissioner Sarla.
Commissioner Peterson, did you have a question?
Just when you were giving examples of when the problem might be appropriate, you mentioned community garden, and I wasn't sure why a community garden isn't to prevent people from.
Fence.
Yeah, 8-foot fence, to like prevent people from stealing tomatoes or.
Yes.
Deer?
Exactly, that's exactly true. Yeah, well, deer doesn't need necessarily 8 foot. It's not always 8 foot, it can sometimes be 6 foot. So the 6 feet is for dog parks and community gardens. Sometimes we have higher depending on the circumstances of the site.
Deer.
But it is,
Jump.
we actually have, that's a big issue.
Yeah.
For us, so.
And that's for a fence, not.
For the fence,
Yeah,
yeah.
for a
There's
fence.
always
We've really has a roof over it now and it's locked.
Yes, they're locked for that purpose.
Yeah, is that, sorry, I don't mean to be too pushy, but I think I am uncomfortable with putting in zoning that we can put an 8-foot wall along the park. That just doesn't make sense to me.
No, that's why that's why we're here to get that type of feedback ahead of your public hearing. So,
All right.
Nearing the end, Commissioner Starling, we've had extensive conversations about the potential impacts related to auxiliary pumps as well as backup generators. Again, DES's strong preference, if at all possible, is for completely gravity systems, where gravity by natural forces is draining the water out to discharging through gravity functions.
Yep.
But the topography may require it, and so.
Yeah, my understanding, stormwater is almost by definition gravity driven. It's very rare that there are.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a preference to have it be through gravity flow.
They historically followed old stream beds.
Yeah, I mean,
Push gravity.
the system overall, is designed that way. I think with some of these new facilities, depending on, sometimes if you make it deeper, it gives you more storage. And so that's one option that they're, looking at with some of the vaults is, depending on how much space we have, so we can go down a little bit more and then we get more capacity, but then we might need a pump. So it's a trade-off. So there may be, I think, Liz can jump in. There's probably not a lot that would need a pump, but it's an option.
But it would be no different than the sewer pumps.
Yeah, for the
It would have
wastewater,
that same type
yeah.
of structure would be necessary.
Yeah, similar.
Yeah, it's a lot less expensive to operate a gravity system than a pump system. The problem that we sometimes run into is the space constraints. We might be trying to save a tree or a recreation area or something, and therefore need to go deeper than the outflow pipes are situated. And then so we would need to lift the water, pump it up, and then because of the nature of the pumps, when it rains, sometimes you lose power, so you need a backup generator.
Okay, I understand that. So I agree with that. We'll have to provide for these.
So when we are having an intensive event, we want the generators to kick on and we want the pumps to work. The challenge from an impact perspective is what could be monthly testing of those generators to make sure that they're operational when we need them to be.
Only daylight hours.
Yep, exactly. And so this is an engagement matter that DES would need to work out with adjacent neighbors and members of the community. We have included full enclosure as a requirement. DES it continues to do that. Will continue to do that. The generators would still meet setback requirements. There are some slight encroachments already in the zoning ordinance for backup generators.
It would be really great if at some point, instead of generators, we use solar and batteries as the backup. Maybe the technology isn't there yet, but that would be a way better
awesome
preference than using diesel generators.
So nearing the end, Commissioner Starling, we can skip through most of this because we've worked it into the presentation already. We've already talked about how with most improvements to a public space and with every one of our stormwater management facilities, there will be a specifically tailored a la carte public process that would would precede that. There's the review that comes as part of the annual CIP as well. So even though a lot of what we've described is by right outside of the Planning Commission's monthly review, outside of SPRC, outside of the use permit process, there are levels of engagement, feedback, and response where the public has a seat at the table. And so there's nothing in the zoning ordinance would change what we're doing already. A lot of what we're doing is tonight is describing what we're doing already. So specific to engagement for this study to date, and DES has taken a real leadership role on this in socializing the text amendment in this body of work with those 6 critical watershed groups that have been working with them, building those relationships as part of Flood Resilient Arlington. We've also done some informational presentations to C2E2, the PSMP Implementation Advisory Committee, the PRC. We also had a virtual public meeting on December 14th. I go more into this ad nauseum in the memo you received over the weekend. But a lot of, again, a broken record, a lot of the comments that we've hitched on tonight have also been things that we've heard from the members of the public. The role of public lands and what they play in stormwater
Great
management.
memo. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
very helpful.
Read through it.
Yeah. So, I'm happy to recount some more of that feedback on the engagement that we've received, but I think it's aligned with and that we've accounted for that in some of in our analysis and the recommendations that we've received to date. So we are, depending on how we do this evening and over the course of any further engagement, we are on track for an RTA next month in February, and the commission would have a public hearing on this at their March regular meeting. And with that, Mr. Chair, further questions, discussion.
I have a further question, and it may be because I haven't followed this as closely as I might have. I think this is great that we're doing this. I'm concerned about the stormwater, but it feels like we're missing the forest for the trees, because we can do all of this, but if we keep letting our development increase impervious surface area, we're always going to be playing catch up. So is there a parallel process going on to address that, or can we include it under the catalyst, increased impervious surface area as a result of increased development, even increased planned development? We know we're doing this. So you guys in DS are doing a great job, but this remains to be a really big issue.
I mean, there's the changes we made to the land disturbing activity permit process. That was something in, I believe in 2021. And so that did add additional requirements. That's more for new homes. So increases in impervious area there. They had an additional requirements to detain stormwater, in addition to kind of the water treatment, that they had prior as well. So that was, a recent change. I mean, I think, there's a challenge. I mean, if you have a site that redevelops and that adds impervious area, if it's still below what's allowed for the site, I mean, there's a limit to sort of, the ability to control that, unless we change, again, those sort of coverage, requirements. So anyway, but I think.
That's for the houses, because when the new houses go up, when it's scrape the site and put a new one.
Yeah.
There does seem to be some sort of storm water facilities built in the new houses, like the bioswales, and there's like troughs that seem to have where the water goes into.
Planters.
Now, isn't it true though, like when we do a site plan though, that stormwater has to be dealt with for any development that's under a site plan? That there has to be.
Yeah, I mean, any development project, has to do stormwater management, as part of that. So I know that.
And does that mean usually have either some sort of stormwater detention that the water gets loosened, let out later after the storm passes, or including green roofs, that sort of stuff? Yeah,
typically, I mean, there's a standard that has to be met. So we don't necessarily specify what type of stormwater management, so they can do, a variety of things: pervious pavement, green roofs, stormwater,
But does it also mean that what gets built has better control of the stormwater than what was there?
Yeah, generally that is the case because a lot of what is sort of, a lot of Arlington developed with no stormwater management. So when properties are replaced, a lot of times it's a benefit in terms of adding that stormwater management. Now you may have changes in the impervious, coverage as well. But typically they, are then, also required to treat kind of that difference. So whatever the increased impervious area, they have to be managing that.
Have we ever had a site plan where it ended up being worse than what was there?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, I can check.
I mean, I want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, you have to look at the
be really
age.
careful that
Yeah.
doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Because one of the advantages of the way we go by having site plan,
Mhm.
one of the community benefits
Yeah.
is stormwater management, that whatever we put in is going to be not just better, but significantly better.
But we're not really worried about site plan, it's more
Yeah,
the
so
single
by-right
family
houses,
homes, the
right.
by right housing.
Right.
Yeah.
Even some of the older ones with enormous driveways. How are we addressing that? And that's not for you to do. Is that something we can be raising in our discussions? Put a little more pressure on that because I really do feel like this is never going to catch up.
Mhm.
Just walking around my neighborhood seeing this.
And that's one of the things, the driveways have always driven me crazy. One of the things that we used to always think was good design for our neighborhoods was having the garage in the back because cars were hidden. You
Yeah.
basically had people facing the street,
Yeah.
either houses, porches, doors, windows, and no big ugly garage doors.
Yeah.
Which was a very good design.
Yeah.
But that also meant a really long driveway.
Yeah.
But our driveways, we also allowed a fully paved driveway. And I've seen driveways that are either all gravel in the neighborhoods. I've seen driveways where it's just two concrete strips with planting down the middle. I've seen them where they're permeable pavers that go most of the way back.
Mhm.
There's lots of solutions to the big ugly driveway
Mhm.
that are better, at least, than what we're allowing by right. Is there some way we can change that so that you don't have just this huge asphalt like my house has, this big asphalt road that goes all the way to the back of the house?
And Eileen, I know you're not used to us in these long discussions, but a lot of the time we raise these things knowing that they're not going to go anywhere now, but we socialize the discussion, we
Right.
get it out there,
Okay.
and someone else will bring it up in 6 months.
Sure.
So is there a place for that here? I really do worry that we could do all these things, but if we don't get a handle on this other sort of monster, the elephant in the room.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's a combination. We did make that change in 2021. I mean, it was
Yeah.
allowed sort of administratively, so
Yeah.
it wasn't necessarily something that went through, the full commission process, but, it was adding additional, stormwater detention requirements for new homes. So right now, I think we're just starting to see some of those projects coming through, kind of completing construction, from that change in 2021. It was the end of 2021, and then they had to, the new permits came through and that kind of thing. So we're just seeing those projects, come to fruition. So we'll be able to evaluate, that more. But yeah, I mean, there's, a lot of factors, with the large driveways. We can't necessarily mandate how people do a driveway. I mean, again, we do require stormwater management, so many of them do the pervious pavers. But I think the driveway choice, I mean, it plays into, if that's some of your lot coverage, that's a choice they're making. Like, do I want to use that
Can we
coverage?
incentivize
Yeah.
that,
Because
or
even the lot
tree
coverage-
retention on the older homes? Is there a way we could be doing that when they're not coming into redeveloper, they're not
Right.
triggering
Mhm.
compliance with the rest of this? I mean, is that something, and this is, I do raise these issues a lot. I feel like we have great planners here, great plans, but a lot of these issues are siloed. Does this come up here? Does this come up in forestry, natural resource management?
The other thing we don't understand, for example, with the driveway
Mhm.
and what's considered impervious, I was told once, and I could have misheard it, that when you have the driveway, it's considered impervious, when you do a concrete or an asphalt driveway from your property line to the garage, that's measured in the square feet. But if you did the two concrete strips with the grass down the middle, that doesn't matter. It's still considered impervious for the whole driveway from front to back without backing out that strip down the middle.
Yeah, well, I believe the whole driveway, I think, does count. Sometimes the challenge with the grass in the middle and also with gravel driveways is that, the soil gets compacted. So just from the action of the car, if it doesn't stay on the strips,
But
that
then even if you
soil.
had a dirt driveway, that would be true.
Yeah,
If you had no paving whatsoever, you'd still have the same issue.
yeah,
Gravel's probably better than dirt.
yeah. Well,
less likely
the
to-
pervious driveways, the way they're constructed, they have the gravel layer underneath, so it kind of
Yeah.
keeps the structure open. So there's more structure underneath there to kind of keep the pore
Because
space.
if you don't, the grass down the middle never gets driven on by definition. That's the
Yeah,
whole
I mean,
point
it
of it.
shouldn't, but I think sometimes, again, the car doesn't.
These
Yeah.
driveways are so narrow, you
Mhm.
can't.
Yeah, you can't wiggle around.
Commissioner Peterson.
So I just wanted to try to figure out, like, for planning for the future, Commissioner Buren referenced that we're like playing catch up. So you all are working with DES because they have their CIP, they have their plans for keeping Arlington, ready to absorb these 50 or 100-year storms that are going to start coming recently. So what we're proposing today, does that allow DES to achieve the CIP goals to handle these 50 or 100-year storms? And, we're just like getting out of their way. We're making sure zoning is getting out of the way to achieve the goals.
That's exactly
Yes.
what's getting out of the way. That's the way I view this.
Yeah.
Categorically, yes.
Okay, and so are you familiar enough with their plans that, like, okay, now we are gonna be able to handle these 100-year storms? Or like, what capacity are we getting? Slide, that you mentioned, we're really not even we're at full capacity right now. And we know we're gonna be developing more. We're approving the projects. We're looking in this middle, we're approving that. Not necessarily, but we're on a path to potentially approve that. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, what are we gonna actually be able to handle? What is DES saying? Like, what, we're gonna, next time we have that giant flood, look at California right now, like, the pictures are terrifying.
Yeah.
And so, like, the bridges got wiped out on Lover Run, and how it took years to replace those. I think they're up now. So I guess I'm wondering, like, what kind of disasters are we gonna be able to avoid by, these projects?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, again, the key point is trying to, remove some of these constraints. We do have, it's a longer term plan, and Liz, you can feel free to jump in. It's going to be a number of years, I think, to, fully design and then construct, a lot of these improvements in some of these critical watersheds where we've had some of the challenges. So it's not something that we can kind of all, complete this year or next year. It's definitely a longer term.
It's a long term.
Yeah.
And the ramp, we have an ongoing risk assessment and mitigation and management project. And that's ongoing, and we're just getting ready to do some public engagement on that. That'll address a little bit of it, but the main focus here was, it came up when we started doing some of the studies for the different watersheds, that we were running square into the zoning ordinance. And so I think we can't even plan some of these things without, a lot of zoning issues the way it stands today. So the purpose of this is to try to remove that obstacle. And we have other obstacles, but this is to remove the zoning obstacle.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board. I
Yeah.
want to remove whatever obstacles we have. I'd like to be able to speed up the process so we don't have to wait 2-3 months to go through all sorts of reviews that don't really add value to what we're trying to get done here. And with these projects being so expensive, the time value of money is just enormous.
Yeah, the longer it takes, the more.
It's just, yeah.
I appreciate that comment. I will sort of qualify that a little bit, that, it is a little bit of being balancing priorities.
Of course.
There's parks, there's DES, there's transportation, there's, so I think we want to clear out of the way, but we also want to make sure, that we're also giving you,
Guidance.
input from areas that we might not have been
Thought of.
radar. I think next steps for this committee, and I always try to figure this out. So we are going to make a recommendation at the Planning Commission, correct? That's what's being sort of brought to us. To
Yes.
essentially recommend that the county board adopt these changes.
Yes. What we'll do, Commissioner Seiler, we're gonna take the feedback.
Right.
Clearly, we have some additional we're going to go back to the woodshed when it comes to the retaining wall, trying to reflect some of the feedback we've got from the commission, and to pay a bit, not that we're not paying attention to it, to really put our thinking caps on and see if we can create some more flexibility, specificity on if an 8-foot fence is being used for enclosure in one of our public spaces. Number one, we're following William White's good principles. We're keeping that access and transparency, but we're not complicating and we're not complicating the pedestrian experience. And so I think we've got some ideas that we can generate to try to bring some more specificity to that, for lack of a better word. So once we do that, we will be actively working on that, because we are in the early stages of preparing for the February county board meeting. And so the next steps would be to have the board authorize the manager to advertise this for public hearings. We'll take everything that you've read this tonight, as well as the conversation tonight. We should have some updates to the language that we've been thinking about. We'll have that, and so presuming the board adopts that resolution, we would have this scheduled for your regular agenda at your March meetings, which I believe are.
They were just scheduled.
Yeah.
Ones.
I believe you are there. I have them in the memo. March 6th or March 8th. Yeah. So you'd be seeing at least me on one of those nights. Hopefully my other colleagues will join me as well. Yeah.
All right.
So that's the next step in the process in this one.
Okay, I think we've heard enough. Is that enough? Did we wrap everything?
Yeah.
Did you get some good feedback?
Mr. Chair, I do have a member of the public who would like to provide virtual comment.
Oh,
tonight.
great. Okay,
Yeah.
we can have a public speaker. All right,
Yeah.
with that, let's wrap it up and give it to the public comment phase.
Mr. Young, the floor is yours. You can turn your camera on if you'd like.
Mr. Young, let's give you like a minute and a half. Is that okay?
This is going to be very quick. And sorry, I'm going to skip the camera for speed. I've listened with interest. Thanks for the opportunity. I would just like for the county to remind people in talking about the increasing frequency and intensity of the precipitation events that climate is driving this. Right now, the background mentions the increasing frequency and intensity, but there's no reference to the fact this isn't a fluke. Climate is driving this, and so it's not going to go away anytime soon. I think it's worthwhile simply to remind people of that driving force. So that's really all I wanted to say, to mention, that I'd rather that we be very explicit about that for the general public. So thank you very much. That's it for me.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Young.
Appreciate you coming to our meeting. With that, unless there's anything else, thank you very much for being here. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for the great memo. I concur with Commissioner Guerin. Very well prepared.
Always, Nick. They're terrific.
Yeah. And hopefully all our comments were viewed in a positive light.
Very much so.
What's the end of the Shakespeare play?